So I feel like my job is to somehow create something new after you've been watching diners, drive-ins, and dives for, you've binged for 6 episodes, and, it's hamburgers and sandwiches and what have you. So I don't think I really have anything especially new to offer you today, but maybe just a little different perspective and kind of want to focus in on maybe the why and a little higher level, and just in terms of the purpose, and kind of bring us back to maybe some of the issues. And I'm reminded of our journey, and Neil talked about this journey, right? We've been at this a long time, about 20 years. USAIP morphed to NAIS. We're with ADT now, and I'm proud to say we have the Cattle Traceability Working Group. That's what today was all about. So I'm going to end with this thought: we are making progress, okay? Things are getting better, right? We've been at it a long time, and those of us that have been involved in this journey, we're pretty tough, but we're starting to really see some progress. I am reminded it's all about producers, and I think Julie said it so well this morning. If you want producers to show up, right, invite the government and tell them they're going to have a big program, and they show up, right? Well, this was ID Info Expo 2006, and Secretary Johann spoke there, and I remember dealing with the security detail and all of that because we had protesters, and we didn't know what it was going to look like outside, and so we got the producers and the hippies too. It was great, right? So that's where we were. But in that, and looking back at that point, I remember Scott Stewart spoke at ID Info Expo 2006, and he left that expo with a couple of, I think, really key talking points, right? And they're a little different now, but focus on the fact that NAIS, and that's gone, but ADT, it's an animal health tool, right? We're talking about animal health first and foremost, right? We need to be realistic about the expectations and the abilities as the system evolves. Perfect. And we need to remain actively engaged in positive dialogue. And I'm going to come back to that to maintain, keyword, progress. Really, we could probably turn this off and go away right now, because that's exactly right. That hasn't changed in 12 years. I thought those are really succinct. So most recently, we have the World Perspectives report that just came out, and I think, as we start talking about the tenets of that, I think they match with what Scott said so well. They're a little different, but these are the things we've been talking about for the last 3 days, right? We're all on the same page. It needs to be industry-driven. It has to serve public and private interests. And I think in our workshop today, as we start talking about the schematic, it's private and public interests coming together and dealing with that, right? Data privacy, just talked about it. It's perfect, right? Have to deal with all the sectors, speed of commerce, credible and domestic and international markets. And those are the things that where we've been, but really important. We've documented those. We've written those down. We can keep coming back to that and understanding that. I think it's interesting that the study really talked about critical mass, and wherever you want to be in this curve, what you think the shape of the curve should look like, and it should be a little steeper, a little flatter. It doesn't really matter. The point is, we do need critical mass here, right, to make it effective. And with ADT, we're kind of getting down to that bottom level, and we're in that green area, and at some point, we're going to continue to move, and we will get to feeder cattle eventually, and we'll start really having critical mass, and probably that thing's going to snowball, and we'll be there sooner than we think. But it's important that we remind ourselves of this. And the point in this is, and we've said it so many times, it takes producers to get us there, right? We can't just do it. It's not going to just happen. Critical mass happens because you bring people along. Now, they don't always all come along, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But so where are we with producer attitudes? And the survey, World Perspective Survey, I think summarized it pretty well. I've read that thing pretty carefully, and I asked the questions. We had a call with them, the working group did, and I asked about the survey data specifically. How did you do it? Where did you get your data? What have you? And I'm pretty comfortable with what they did. I think they did some pretty good work there, and they followed up with qualitative analysis too, right? And I know every survey, none of them are perfect, but I think it gives us a pretty good clue. And okay, so you look at producer attitudes, 10% firm opposition. We know those people are out there. 10%, they're kind of resigned. It's coming. And then there's this big group, cautiously supportive. It doesn't mean they're going to run out the door and sign up, but they are beginning to understand that they are part of a broader public good, and if they're not involved, there's sort of a moral hazard issue here, right? And then we have 15% wholesale support, and I'm going to come back to some more of this producer survey data, because I think it's really interesting, and I think it's important. So, where do we start? Well, it's got to start at the ranch, right? Any meaningful bookend system, and as we talked about the schematic, it's got to start at the ranch. You look at the data in terms of the surveys. Okay, sure, you're going to have in every component, no matter the cow herd size, you're going to have some component they either can't do it or they won't do it. Okay? And what's interesting though is you start looking at sort of the 3, 4, they're in between, and then the 5s, they're strongly supported. Okay, and obviously as we get into bigger cow herds, they're more supportive of doing it at the ranch because they're already doing it. They're doing it much like Roger. They're gaining some value. They're participating in a value-added program. But it's interesting, right? There's a lot of ranchers, producers out there. They're in that 2 to 3 or 3 to 4, wherever. So they're not just opposed to doing this, but we probably haven't given them a compelling reason yet. We haven't incentivized them necessarily or disincentivized them, however you want to think of it. But we're not that far away in terms of bringing them along. So it's interesting, as I'm thinking through all this and this whole process, I go back to a talk I did in 2007, the year after we had the hippies protest. I talked about a tale of two bridges. So here's bridge number 1. And that's the Bright Tag Bridge, right? It's cheap, but it's neither fast nor good, and actually it really is a hindrance, okay? And we're trying to put a big system across something that doesn't work. And I think we're moving past that. And if you ask me, the most recent ADT analysis that came out, the program review that Neil talked about today, as I read through that thing, if I were going to take one snippet and said, this matters, it's this statement. Possibly the most significant change in stakeholder opinion since the establishment of the current ADT program in 2013 is an increase in the support for EID for cattle. Take that home with you. Producer support, electronic ID, we're getting somewhere. We're making progress. That's exciting. Okay? And you look at the World Perspective Survey, the survey matches that qualitative analysis by USDA. Okay? We don't have them all, but we're getting there. You're starting to see that trend. We're, again, the 3s, the 4s, the 5s, you start adding them up. That's 2/3, 70% of the population out there. 70% of the producers, yeah, they're either kind of there, ready to go with EID. So we've got something to grab onto and work with. And I don't think it should be surprising, right? Technology is everywhere. And I said to Chuck Adamy yesterday, I said, how many of your customers that come through your auction markets have smartphones? And he just laughed. Most of them, all of them, right? Technology is everywhere. And we see that, and we see technology coming at this industry very quickly in all kinds of ways. And fortunately, the company that I've worked with for the last 4 years, it's kind of enabled me to cross-section with a lot of other people in the technology area and kind of following Ag Funder, and you see lots of new ventures coming to farms and ranches, and they're not all going to survive, but we are increasingly implementing and using data and technology in all kinds of ways in terms of food production. So we're not too far off. It's not that scary, really. Now, sometimes we feel like this, don't we? Right? It's a little like herding cats, and where do we go? And it's frustrating, but we can't get frustrated. We can't, because it's easy to just write off, but we've got to kind of press on through. But I was reminded, my editor's right here in front of me, and so I do a weekly column for Beef Magazine when they let me, and so I did put up the survey from World Perspectives, and it's not very often that we get responses or comments, but one of them says we already have traceability. Voluntary traceability is a wonderful thing. That's right. I got that. It appears that whoever took the survey and whoever wrote this article, that would have been me, I don't think are trying to sway producers to accept mandatory traceability. Well, what's interesting is I'm not trying to sway anybody. I was just presenting the facts, but it can be almost anything. My point in this is almost anything can be a point of resistance for some producers out there, right? And I thought Joe Leathers said it so well, and it reminded me of a George Bush quote. There's a difference between honest critics who recognize what's wrong and defeatists who refuse to see anything that's right. Okay? If you're going to criticize, make it meaningful. Otherwise, we're moving on. And by the way, we already have mandatory traceability. ADT, it's mandatory, right? So we're already there. So what we're doing, I think a lot, someone asked me last night if I had majored in psychology. I don't know, I'm a dad, but, right? One of the greatest pains to human nature is the pain of a new idea. That's what we're doing. We're implementing a new way of doing business. We're trying to be innovative. We're trying to make the food system better, safer, faster, more secure. Makes you think that after all, your favorite notions may be wrong, your firmest beliefs ill-founded. Walter Bagehot, 1872. Human nature hasn't changed much. So as much of what we're doing, we're doing the hard work, the practical stuff, but we're also working in kind of this realm, right? We're changing mindset as we go forward. So the World Perspective Survey, going forward, what are the costs? There is a direct cost to doing traceability, doing it better, right? I think I've said to Tony how many times, we have traceability. We can trace stuff. It's just really slow. We just need to do it faster. But there's a cost to that, right? Good, fast, cheap. Okay? So if you want it good and fast, it's not necessarily going to be cheap. But what I'm reminded of and what we talked about yesterday, it's the opportunity cost if we don't do it. Okay? Exports, cattle, $300 a head, $2,500 per hundredweight. I had a conversation with a producer the other day, asked me, well, so how does that all end up? I says, most of that, 99% of that's going to go back to the cow-calf producer. Feed yards and stockers operate on margins like that. It all goes back upstream. We take that away, that's going to be problematic. So I liked how Thad Lively said it yesterday. We're vulnerable to unforeseen developments, U.S. at a competitive disadvantage. And if we don't do it, it just slows down our commerce continuity. And then the other aspect of this, it's domestic confidence. If we do have a hiccup in the system and we're not able to trace back and implement commerce continuity in a pretty fast manner, it's confidence. What happens if we have stop movement and you can't get hamburger at Walmart? Whatever, right? And we work in just-in-time inventory. It doesn't take long big hiccups and you start to have problems. So that's really my passion in all this. I worked on a project about 10 years ago through the National Institute of Justice. It was based out of Ford County, Kansas. Pat Roberts was instrumental in funding a multidisciplinary project to look at what would happen if we had a bioterrorism event in southwest Kansas, okay, and most notably Ford County, Dodge City. And so I got to work with all kinds of disciplines, animal health officials, military people, law enforcement, and it's a fascinating study. And it's very scary when you start talking about the potential for this. And many of you know, right? You have stop movement, and this, of course, the big concern is FMD, but it's expensive, and it's very scary. So let's fast forward to 2016, and I believe Carla, I did a talk for your group a year ago, your committee, and I included this slide. So what are the key vulnerabilities? So interestingly enough, the law enforcement people in that project, they knew nothing about livestock. They couldn't believe we didn't have ID. They said, we ID everything. And he kept talking about, he was a former director at the FBI. He kept talking about vehicle identification numbers, VINs. They're on everything. Every bit of your vehicle has a VIN. It's stamped on the axles. Okay? And it's not that you're necessarily going to stop something, but you're going to be able to more quickly understand what's going on, tighten the loop, narrow down where the real threat is. And he couldn't believe we didn't do this. But, okay? So February 26th hearing. Examine the risk of terrorist attack, natural disruption, U.S. ag sector. Are the public and private sectors prepared to respond to these threats? Key vulnerabilities. Absence of traceability. That's the one that highlights for me here. Okay? So we talk about all this animal health. We don't talk about homeland security very much and the fallout. And that was really my job in the project, was to outline what if. What happens? What are the economic costs, and then sort of the non-direct costs, lack of consumer confidence. What happens if you can't buy milk? Because now we have to test every load of milk, what have you, okay? It's a big challenge as we go forward. We've got to be proactive here, and it speaks to the opportunity cost, and I love this quote because it's so true, and it's 10 years old, 12 years old. The most dangerous situations arise when the threat is ambiguous, because we keep forgetting about it. This leads managers, or whoever, to ignore or discount the risk and take a wait-and-see attitude. Such an approach can be catastrophic. Such an approach can be catastrophic. What if? What if we sort of just kind of wait and see, we'll get there? We may not like the consequences on the other side of that. It's something we need to think about. We can't wait for the crisis. So this is the second bridge. James Eads is one of my heroes. He's an engineer. He built the first bridge across the Mississippi River, those of you that have been to St. Louis. And it was said at the time the genius did not exist in the country capable of erecting such a structure. Okay? People were crossing the Mississippi River, right? But it was slow. And everyone told him he couldn't build this bridge. It was brand new technology. Everyone told him it won't work, it won't work. And he was a fighter. Great book, by the way, Rising Tide. It's about the flood of the Mississippi in 1927, how we ultimately tamed the Mississippi River. It's changed the world in terms of managing farm ground all along the Delta. It's made America what it is. I truly believe that. It's challenging, but we can do it. And that's really what we're trying to do here, is build a better bridge so we can speed things up and have good and fast and do jobs better. And when we hear you can't do it, and I said to somebody, and My apologies to my Canadian colleagues, friends in here, right? This is America. We can do this, right? We have all of the ability and all the knowledge, and so look at the things that we can do. So I'll just leave you with the last thought. I shared this with you at lunch the other day, our member luncheon. Preserve the core. We got good things going, right? But we have to continue to stimulate progress. And the only sacred cow should be its basic philosophy of doing business. It's philosophy, but we're going to do business in a lot of different ways. That's how companies are built to last. That's how industries are built to last. Preserve the core, stimulate progress. So we just got to keep working at this. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but sometimes when it gets tough out there, right? Because as soon as we go out there, it's going to get tough again. We see the possibilities, but we've got to remind ourselves of that.